Hello, welcome back to another edition of This Week in Haiti from Haiti Liberté. And as our faithful audience has come to expect, you're joined again by myself, Joseph Mullen, and Kim Ives, the English language editor. Well, we have the English language forum here because we
Yes.
discuss a lot of the week's English news for Haiti. So this week we're gonna begin kind of recapping some of the articles from the English section for the week as people are joining live, people are watching this after the fact as well. And we'll begin with the week's news and then talk a little bit as well about some of some events that Kim, you attended in this past Friday, an event.
Yes, in Washington, yes.
Mhm. And at the end, I have a little some discussion on filmmaking and films, which we will get
Okay.
to, which will be kind of our end segment if we're doing kind of segments for the podcast now. But to begin,
And it should be said, I've not been briefed on what these questions
Yeah.
are, so this will all be spontaneous.
yes.
Joseph's new approach is
Yeah.
nothing scripted here.
So to begin, the one of the cover page articles that we had for this week was on the interim federal administration, the illegal occupying government, which declared 4 days of national mourning after the
I think it was
hurricane-
3.
or 3 days of national mourning after Hurricane Melissa touched down across parts of the Caribbean.
But it should be said, it was a glancing blow it gave
Yeah.
Haiti. I mean,
Yeah.
it was really Jamaica
Thankfully,
that got it.
thankfully not terrible in Haiti, worse in Jamaica for sure. So this kind of touches on some analysis that we've had running past a couple of weeks on the show, where we have kind of drawn parallels between events like this, where there's a natural disaster, there's an earthquake, for example, and a big story that we had when we had just started the show, which was on the government being involved, being complicit in a drone strike which occurred in the neighborhood of Simone Pele. And we're pretty sure that this drone strike is, I say pretty sure, but confident that the drone strike is from the forces that are intervening in Haiti now with Eric Prince, who we've talked about a lot, and that the government knows about it, maybe participated in it. I mean, it's how, doubtful they didn't know about it and whatnot. But the parallel or contrast is that when the government finds it beneficial to themselves, to their credibility, to their image, they participate in the funerals and costs for the families, whatnot. But when, of course, with this drone strike, when the facade is damaged a little bit, that they are
Oblivious.
purely benevolent and um, treating the nation as one big family or whatever, right, where they step in as kind of that father figure to cover costs and tend to the wounded and whatnot. Then they're nowhere to be seen. So that was kind of a contrast that we were emphasizing. So my question after these days of mourning have elapsed, and to kind of continue on really outlining a plan of action, a program of force in a variety of ways that the Vive Ensemble or the FRG9, the revolutionary forces in Haiti that are opposing imperialism and the comprador government, when they have opportunities like this, for example, like, you know, we saw in Another Vision, the film that Kim and Dan Cohen, collaborator for Haiti Liberté, the film which is on our YouTube channel in 4 parts worth checking out.
3 parts, Another Vision, and the 4th one being Intervention versus Revolution.
Yeah, the follow up episode. But,
standalone, yeah.
My question is, when these kind of things present themselves. So, was why I brought up the films was that we saw in one of the episodes that before Vive Ensemble was formed, that Jimmy Cherizier was, you know, attending funerals and helping cover costs and giving speeches to victims of the violence from the authorities and the imperialist forces. So how can these be, for lack of a better word, an opportunity for Vive Ensemble to kind of step in, almost playing a parastatal, and they're opposed to the state. They want to capture state power, but so they have the whole the dual power, you know, kind of counter power role, where they're, and I think this is very helpful in analyzing where the sort of the ultra left goes wrong with respect to these movements, because in constantly saying, oh, they're violent, they're thugs, they're criminals, etc., that they're simply you know, that the ferocity of resistance is something to be looked down upon, when on the other hand it's important to have some power if the government isn't going to have a funeral for victims of a strike that they created, of course. So somebody has to help cover the cost of a funeral, right? So my question is, yeah, how following events like these, and how can the revolutionary forces kind of step into that role, what the government won't?
Right. Well, I think we have to define revolutionary forces. But if we're going to say it's people who would like to see systemic change in the direction of socialism, in an anti-capitalist way in Haiti, the first thing is to support the people's moves in that direction. And as you said, essentially what the Vive Ensemble is a series of neighborhoods throughout the Port-au-Prince region. They are each autonomous in a sense. They are not under a central control. No one neighborhood has power over any other. Each neighborhood leader is autonomous, we could say, or sovereign in their zone. And as you say, they've essentially assumed the role of state, because the state fell away over the past 40 years, since the fall of the Duvalier dictatorship in 1986. There has just been a gradual disintegration of the state, which is largely encouraged by the United States, by Washington, because, and you can read this in their reports from that period, that is, we have to change governance in Haiti. You know, good governance. This is like one of their watchwords, like privatization, good governance. But the good governance means technocrats run things, and increasingly what they set loose in Haiti, set loose on Haiti, are NGOs. Haiti is known as the Republic of the NGOs. It has more NGOs per capita than any nation on earth. And as a result, state structures began to wither and die and just become dysfunctional. They existed maybe in name, but they didn't do anything. So this is where neighborhoods, and Haitians, as a rule, are much more collective, I could say, than, say, Americans, who each are sort of isolated and atomized in their little house or their little fortress or maybe their little gated community.
Sure. Yeah.
But in Haiti, there is a much more communal and collective ethic. And a lot of Americans get sort of hooked on Haiti when they go there for the first time, because they maybe can't put a finger on it, they maybe can't see it precisely, but they feel it and they, sense it. People might be hungry, they go by somebody else's house who doesn't have much food themselves, but they'll share it. There's a sharing, there's a communal effort. So these neighborhoods got together, and again, we detail this in some to some extent in Another Vision, where we show how Another Vision was in fact the name of the community organization that Jimmy Cherizier put in place in Delma 2, Delma 4, Delma 6. These are the names of roads, sort of like vertebrae going off the spine, which is called the Delma Road. They're on the south side of the road. And we show how they got together making garbage collection, doing water purification and providing people with clean water, fixing people's houses. And as you said, in the case of the drone strike, they're in charge of funerals, for example. A funeral costs a lot of money for a Haitian, maybe not as much as it would in the United States, but the people don't have the wherewithal, so they turn to the leader of the community. In the case of Lower Delma, it's Jimmy Cherizier, and say, Jimmy, my son died, or my husband died, or my daughter, wife died. Can you help with the funeral? And he has to come up with the wherewithal for that. So that, in that sense, he becomes the state. He steps in to assist the community. And this is what's reproduced, say, in Village de Dieu. They would go to Ives, who's the leader there, or in Croix-de-Bouquet, they would go to La Mort Saint-Jour, who is the leader there, or in Canara, they would go to Jeff Gaulois. That's how he's called now. It used to be Jeff LaRose, but he's Jeff Gaulois, which means big spirit in Creole. So in a sense, I mean, it's not an ideal arrangement, but it's how Haitians are coping on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis with this problem. And increasingly, these neighborhoods become autonomous regions. Now, it's funny how imperialism always demonizes any resistance. You take, for example, the FARC in Colombia, which was one of the longest running, or has been one of the longest running, guerrilla resistance movements in the history of not just Latin America, but of the world. They started in the 1960s, and there still are portions of them which are still resisting, even though there was some kind of peace plan negotiated in Cuba a few years ago. But they always were trying to demonize, say, oh, they're just criminals too. They're drug dealers. They make their, okay, yes, they had to deal with uh, farmers who, because the price of coffee had been sent into the basement by the US uh, trade policies throughout the world, making every country in the South grow coffee and making the prices of coffee plummet, they had to turn to cocaine to feed their families, to etc. So, okay, now they're drug producers, drug lords, drug whatever. The FARC had to deal with this. They can't uproot it. They can't change the economy of Colombia. They didn't have state power. But they tried to demonize them for this and make them something that was evil. And in fact, I used to work, as we may have mentioned, with former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. And part of his life's mission at the end of his life, after he'd been U.S. Attorney General until 1968, was to go to countries around the world which were targeted by U.S. sanctions or by U.S. war. The first one was Panama, really. Well, the first one was Vietnam. He went to in the 70s with Jane Fonda. That was the beginning of his demonization. And the next really big one was in 1990, because the invasion happened in December of 1989, to Panama, when George H.W. Bush invaded Panama to capture, remove from power, a lot like Trump is doing now with Maduro, Manuel Noriega, who had been at one point an ally of the U.S., but became enlightened and began to resist the U.S. And as a result, he had to be marked, but it wasn't just for that. It was for a whole geopolitical reason too, involving the Panama Canal, but we won't go into all those details. But the U.S. invaded Panama, and they said, there were only 500 Panamanians. Well, no, not 500 Panamanians died, according to Ramsey Clark's delegation that he led down there. And there's a film called The Panama Deception. I forget the name of the director, a woman, but a very important film to watch even now. That Panama is coming, like the U.S. lackey, to support the U.S. program in Haiti. The delegation of Ramsey Clark found over 3,000 were probably killed, judging from the testimony and the mass graves and the evidence they found. So Ramsey went around to countries. His next really big one was to Haiti with myself and others after the 91 coup d'etat. And he went to Iraq, he went to Syria, he went to Iran, he went to countries world over. But getting back to where we started, he went to Colombia. He went to the jungles of Colombia and met with the FARC and talked to them and said, you are being demonized, you are being targeted, you are a threat to the empire, and I support you, and what can we do to help you? Okay. So now back to Haiti. This is exactly what's happening in Haiti. These movements in these various neighborhoods have sprung up. Are they perfect revolutionary models? No. Many of them have a very, shall we say, undeveloped political consciousness, or they're just beginning to understand things, but they do understand that they have been used, they don't want to be used anymore, and they want a change in system. They want to be able to live. They want to be able to live, and they want their neighborhoods to be able to prosper and sustain themselves. So that is what's happening. They're being demonized. But just to get back to the ultra left, they are not supporting these oh yeah, that was where I was going. In the Vietnam War, in the war in Colombia, which stretched on for decades, in the wars in Central America, El Salvador, Nicaragua, you used to have what were called liberated zones. Liberated zones when it meant they were not under the control of whoever the US puppet government was. So a liberated zone was one liberated from imperialist control. And that's essentially what these Viva Some neighborhoods are. They are liberated zones, but they're not framed like that. And the left doesn't see them like that, although they should. They should be accompanying these people and trying to bring them whatever wisdom they think they have for how to move forward and how to further disengage from the US empire, which has been, at the end of the day, the source, the wellspring of all the woes of Haiti, not the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie is just an intermediary. They're the hand at the end of the imperialist arm. But the actual imperialist siphoning of wealth from Haiti is the fundamental problem. And we can see this in any country that begins to free itself. Suddenly there is now resources. There is a will and a capacity to create schools, to have literacy campaigns, to give medicine to everybody, to even export doctors, as Cuba does, to build magnificent infrastructure, as China does, to better the life of people. I was interesting, Joseph, today I was reading an article in the New York Times, of all places. It was in yesterday's Saturday's Times, about the nostalgia that East Germans are having for the Soviet Union, about how things were different, things were better, things were not the way they are now, that all the promises of so-called reestablishment of capitalism in its brutal, raw, ruthless form has made their lives worse. And they don't agree with the policies of Germany supporting the war against Russia in Iran, in Ukraine, the support, the military support being given to Ukraine to act as a proxy for US aggression against Russia. So this is simply to show that these areas are becoming autonomous, and the left should be accompanying them, should be supporting them, even if it's a critical support in their liberation process. Because in Haiti, in my 50 years of working around Haiti, this is the furthest, the most critical crisis, to be a little redundant, a critical crisis that you are having in the hemisphere. And that's not my words. That's Henry T. Worcester, the US ambassador's words. He says this is our greatest crisis in the hemisphere. So let's wake up and stop, as we have in an editorial by Bertani Dupont, our director this week in Haiti Liberté, a very good dissection of a letter that the ultra-left of Haiti, who are mostly found within part of the temporary presidential council, the transitional presidential council, TPC in English or CPT in French. They have one seat on this 9-seated hydra called the Montana Accord. And most of these ultra-left are part of, supporters of, or de facto supporters of the Montana Accord. So they wrote a letter to the OAS giving them a history lesson on how heroic and anti-colonial Haiti's history is, but without ever mentioning that CPT, without ever mentioning the nefarious role the OAS has played, particularly 60 years ago when it was the front for the invasion, the US invasion of Dominican Republic, which crushed the resistance there and put in place the Balaguer government, crushing the Juan Bush government. And ironically, Juan Bush ended up becoming just about as royalist as Balaguer, a little bit like what's happened with Aristide, who's now also sitting on the transitional presidential council. So all this to say that liberated zones, these are autonomous regions, they are resisting regions, and this is why the US is sending in troops under the cover of this gang suppression force that they're putting together with Panama, which again, back in 1989, they kicked out the wobbling government there and put in their own proxies who remain in power to this day. And therefore, the process is one of liberation that's in Haiti, but we don't see it like that. We're all in support of Venezuela, Colombia, and Cuba, I think, but we need to be more in support of Haiti as well.
Yeah, I think that part of the reaction also of the left here, for example, to the electoralism for the DSA, for example, for Zoran Mamdani, that there tends to be a lot more love given to, you know, these governments which come into power through electoral means. Everybody was very excited for when, forgetting his name off the top of my head, but the Chilean, the current president of Chile, first come into power.
His name's skipping my head.
Yeah. Well, his name is worth forgetting because he's kind of a forgettable.
He's a forgettable character.
He's one of those, you know, paper mache leftists that come into office through electoral means and then
in nice words, but then they
fall apart after that. I mean, Petro, it kind of remains to be seen. I have a lot of reservations, particularly about, well, the stuff with Haiti.
Petro and Gustavo Petro in Colombia.
I think that, there's just this desire. And I think that with the current presidential council that exists, it's interesting that there might be more, you know, this kind of nostalgia for Aristide that existed from the 90s when everything was, the Soviet Union had fallen apart. And so you had, you know, electoral victories which were occurring, right? For example, even with the fall of apartheid, and you had the ANC coming into power through an election, and then subsequently realizing that that was less of the seizure of power and more of a kind of a deflection towards something different, but not something something that is slightly different, but more of the same in a lot of these countries. I mean, Aristide, as we've talked about at length, and the coming to power of Famila Velas is not quite the same as kind of like Salvador Allende. You know, there are ways in which, and even if I remember correctly, the full story with Hugo Chavez coming to power, that again, there's nothing to say that an electoral process is totally useless or whatever, but like, again, looking at the outpouring of euphoria around Zoran and then thinking it's this kind of placebo effect. which is to turn towards kind of where I'm going with this, that there is an election which is supposed to take place in Haiti. And probably for some people who are following, they might see that as, well, great, that is the way that we can resolve this problem. We don't want these armed forces because we're kind of scared of violence and we don't like that, right? We want to keep our hands completely clean. Um, but on the other hand, we want some change to be seen, and it is fascinating to have in this Montana Accord and in the Transitional Council uh, that there are leftists participating, well, leftists in name only, but especially once you've given your consent to participate in the formation of this body, you really are no longer part of the left because you're part of the the thing that you're supposed to be uh,
Fighting.
facing off and fighting exactly. So this election that is going to take place for those who are able to read the article this week from Kervin's Luisant, although I will say that's the one in English, but there have been really numerous great articles by Catherine Charlemagne of in this series that's ongoing, which is Haiti from one transition to another, and there are a couple of sub series in there about this subject. And I mean, what's fascinating, if I can make a kind of a weird comparison, when you're thinking of in the U.S. when you had the 2000 election in Florida, you see how much money gets pumped into elections, and lawyers get contracts to go work for certain campaigns and candidates because they're going to contest, do the legalese stuff around these elections. People get hired to work as poll workers, all the minutia that elections become a really, especially, bourgeois elections, which are kind of a facade and really a lot of just the carnival coming into town and having false appearances of democracy, which is actually very anti-democratic because it's very bureaucratic. But with this election, on the one hand, again, there's, I think, a very valid critique in this article and in a lot of the reporting that we've had in Haiti Liberté around this election, that it's unlikely this is even going to happen. It could even be done if it's even possible to have an election. Would the result be valid? But I mean, again, that's assuming that these elections are ever fully democratic or ever can fully yield an outcome. And I think when we're looking at having Vivan Sam, having an armed revolutionary force in the country, we don't need to worry as much about this the bourgeois facade. Is it going to be proper or whatever? Like that's like here we're stuck on Zoran because we can't really imagine something
Right.
greater than that. But the question that I'm going to ask on the election front is just where are the funds coming from for allowing the provisional election council to have this? How are they accumulating funds for
Right.
to do this?
Okay. Yeah, let's just unpack the whole election dynamic, because what people have to understand is that imperialism is constantly adapting to new realities to survive. We are living in an era not of the traditional wars between two armies on a field. We have now what's fifth generation warfare, where it's happening.
And lawfare.
Lawfare is part of it. All sorts of psychological warfare is part of it. All sorts of invisible digital warfare is part of it. So it's far more complex. And if we just look at the history of the election warfare going on in Latin America for decades, they figured they had solved it. Salvador Allende was elected I believe it was 1971 or 1970. And he ruled for 2 or 3 years in Chile. People were actually pretty happy with what was happening. He had a lot of support, but the US under Nixon, it was Kissinger who really was the mastermind of that coup. They said, we got to remove this guy. In fact, in many ways, they saw it as a cancer. In that same year of 1973, I believe, the US ambassador in Haiti was kidnapped. This is a little known chapter. A lot of people don't know. Clinton Knox was kidnapped by a Haitian commando, very small, 2 men and a woman. And they ambushed him, and they asked for a larger group, but they asked for, I think, 34 prisoners to be released, political prisoners to be released from the prisons, Fort Dimanche and Caserne des Salines, which were the 2 political prisons of the day. I believe it was only 19 that they got. And I think they asked for $2 million, which was a lot of money back then. I think they got 500 grand. And they asked for a plane, and they got the plane, and the plane flew from Port-au-Prince. I think it stopped in Mexico for refueling, but it ended up going to Chile. And Chile was where they could get off and be able to not be arrested or have the CIA come get them, etc. So this was the kind of event, that Chile helped really tell the Nixon administration, we have to get rid of these sons of bitches. And so they fine-tuned their whole electoral structure so they wouldn't have any more electoral victories like Salvador Allende's. And that was basically the same thing they use here. The candidate with the most money wins, and they started to pump in money to all the various parties that were their agents in those countries. And it got to the point where it became such a machine that the CIA couldn't handle it, and they had to spin off or cut out a part of the CIA to do that legally or openly. And that was called the National Endowment for Democracy, which would essentially pump in money to their candidates. And in fact, they were so systematic about it that they even made 2 parts, because sometimes the Republicans preferred some puppet and the Democrats preferred another. So 2 branches of the NED became the National Democratic Institute, or NDI, and the Republican branch became the International Republican Institute, or IRI. So that worked for quite a while. They were winning elections everywhere because they were just pumping millions, billions even, into the campaigns of these various neo-colonial puppets in Latin America. And Haiti, again, was the first country to really foil that after Allende in 1990, when on December 16th, that will be almost 35 years ago, in 1990, the Haitian people selected a parish priest, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, a former parish priest. He'd been excommunicated by the Catholic Church at that point, or not excommunicated, but defrocked. He no longer was a priest. And he won that election, pulling away. When they stopped counting, he had 67% of the vote out of a field of 11. And totally trouncing, totally spanking the World Bank economist, Marc Bazin, that the US was backing. So it was very much like Mamdani. Very, very much like Mamdani, in that he was winning just on the basis of popular enthusiasm. Marc Bazin outspent him 72-1. Marc Bazin had a war chest of $36 million. And I'm sure Cuomo's war chest was larger than Mamdani's. But he had $36 million Jean-Bertrand Aristide's electoral war chest, 500,000. So 72-1, Marc Bazin lost completely. And the US said, wow, we have to really look at this and make sure this doesn't happen again. So it's a little bit, for those of people who've watched Star Trek: The Next Generation, it's like the Borg. You know, the Enterprise would, you know, shoot the Borg, and you know, once the Borg kind of figures it out, it, you know, it's like a giant computer flying through space, and it adapts. And now, when you shoot it again, it's had time to adapt its defenses. So the Borg, if we look at the Empire as the Borg, started to find ways to really make that more difficult for another. And part of that was to build this very Byzantine electoral structure. Back in 1990, it was pretty easy. People went, they gave their card, they signed it, they signed, boop, they voted, bing. But it was very simple. Very, I mean, Haiti at that point was only about 10 million. Now it's about 12 or 13 million. But, you know, the vote was quite smooth and organized solely by Haitians. Even though the US had proposed that the UN come in and supervise it, the blue helmets. But who stopped that? That was Ben Dupuy, my mentor, and who was then itinerant ambassador. No, he wasn't itinerant ambassador. Sorry, Aristide wasn't elected. But he was a political leader. He was actually the first political leader to propose Aristide as president, at which point all the political class, including the ultra-left, said, oh, what are you trying to do? You're crazy, you know. But there, a few months later, Aristide was indeed the candidate and did become president. So simply to show how the trepidation of the left is sometimes its biggest enemy or biggest obstacle. So what they did was they made the electoral process of registering and, you know, getting on the ballot, etc., a lot the way it is here. Very difficult sometimes to get on the ballot. I mean, you can get into, you can become a candidate, but you're not on the ballot, or they have to write you in, or you're down in a corner somewhere. You know, it's they made this bureaucratic maze that candidates have to go through. That's one. And then two, they made all this funding through NGOs and through the UN and through all kinds of agencies. I haven't looked at it for quite a while, but it's just a flood of money which sloshes around and goes in from one pot into another. And this is funded by Germany. This part is funded by Spain. The US is over here. France is there. And so you get this hodgepodge of NGOs and interstate bilateral loans and et cetera. So the US, France, and Canada, who are the three principal neo-colonial powers in Haiti, have their hands and fingers in all corners of the electoral machinery. So the CAP, now it's gotten to the point where Haitians say, well, you know, we can't have an election without the foreigners. So this becomes like gospel. It's gospel now that you have to have the foreigners, the US, the people you're trying to free yourself from have to be the one to pay you to vote in the candidate you want who's going to free you from them, which obviously won't work. You have to break the paradigm, break the logic, break the machinery, break the algorithm, to use a 2025 notion. So you have to break the algorithm, break free of the algorithm, and have a sovereign election. You can do it. You know, it's a lot like even development. When the Chinese were having their revolution, they had a lot of problems. They had all kinds of of course, pushback from the empire. They luckily were able to avoid having General Douglas MacArthur drop an atomic bomb on them as he wanted to. I mean, they dodged a lot of bullets. But one of them was they had to do things like build a dam. So how did they build a dam? Well, they couldn't get the trucks and concrete. Soviet Union was still on its back foot from the war, which bore the brunt, of course, of the Second World War, lost a generation, 25 million people. So what they did was they got shovels, and they gave 1 million people shovels, and they built a dam out of earth. They would build dams out of earth because they couldn't get the concrete and the cranes and the bulldozers and dump trucks to do it the way they do it now, where they can build a hospital in a week, as they did at the beginning of COVID. So Haiti can do the same thing. Haiti can organize its own election. Haitians have a lot more discipline than Americans, I can tell you that, in general, when they are in agreement with something. And they will hold an election. Yes, it won't be perfect, but they can do their own election. They don't have to have the US or France or Canada or the UN or the OAS or the CARICOM or the et cetera, come in and run the show. No. And I can tell you from experience in my reporting, even when the OAS and CARICOM are running the show, they're violating their own rules. For instance, and it's a little hazy now in my memory, but there was a vote by the Electoral Council about whether to approve, was it a candidate or was it an election? Oh, yes, it was for the election of Martelly. I believe. And anyway, one of the counselors, I simply remember the exchange with the OAS or CARICOM, because there was a joint OAS-CARICOM mission, certain Colin Granderson. And I asked him about, listen, the Electoral Council said that the candidate or the measure that you're proposing was illegal and that shouldn't happen. And he just smiled at me and said, yes, we are aware of that. But, they weren't going to change. They were still going to do it. It's the same way the Haitian Constitution says, black on white paper, that no foreign military force can be deployed in Haiti. They just, backhand that. It's not even mentioned. It doesn't even enter into the logic. So all of this is a very long-winded answer to how and why are they funding. This is to control it, and the funding is coming in through a dozen pores. I can't do the details because I didn't prepare, but it comes through 1 million ways to basically control the funding. You control the candidates. You get a more granular control of the whole operation, and that way you don't have a repeat of a malfunction like happened in 1990 in Haiti, which, by the way, was the beginning of the pink tide. That was Hugo Chavez, Evo Morales, Rafael Correa, even Lula saw this victory and said, there is a chance that we can work through elections. Are these elections in Haiti going to be anything like that? Not at all. I think the only way Haiti is going to get out is if Haitians get together, as Bethany Dupont wrote in his editorial 2 weeks ago, in Make a United Front, say, thank you, but no thank you. US, France, and Canada will manage our own affairs. And with Viva Sam, they sit down and organize some sort of provisional government to hold elections.
Yeah, I think that that's probably, even though that might be again in the minds of a lot of the left wing, particularly in the imperial core, that's not the most salient objective for them, because they prefer, and I think, seeing again the kind of the way elections turn into a lot of just buffoonery, and they have all these formalities which you start to follow, like having a debate, having a watch parties and canvassing and all this stuff, right? These are kind of the ripple effects of a form of bourgeois electoralism, which here in this country the left likes to participate in, because it probably makes people feel like, you're doing something to work towards.
This is what democracy looks
Yeah,
like.
right. This is the only way to interpret democracy, and to follow it. And I think because people do think we can kind of chip away at the system from within the system, and do, if we just do the things that are otherwise astroturfed by the establishment and the powers that currently, have, I mean, just can hire people to do that instead of have force. And I mean, like you said, with the comparison of funds, right? People think that if we just have a lot of enthusiasm, that we can, do that and still have it be peaceful, and still,
Right.
just be, just kind of out tweet the empire.
One, two, three, many Mamdanis.
Yeah, right. And I think that we'll see if, I think again that there's a discussion to be had, and with this article we can have a debate whether the elections we can be kind of predictive in the months leading up to February. And here I'm sure we'll talk about it more as we get closer to February, of whether the election will even happen. Will it, like when we get to February, will we be sitting here saying, well, February 7th, no election happened?
Well, it won't happen before the
Right.
7th. Even
Yeah.
the Electoral Council, as we report this week, the president of the Electoral Council, that's Kervin's article, of course, said there's no way in hell that there's going to be an election an election before February 7th. That is February 7th, just to repeat for the listeners who might be tuning in for the first time, the Transitional Presidential Council, CPT, that was put in place in April of 2024, were supposed to organize an election that would be inaugurated on February 7th, 2026.
Yeah. So the likelihood of that, we will keep abreast of these developments, even though
what they've done in the past, Joseph, was in 2006, that is basically 20 years ago, there was supposed to be an election that would pass power on February 7th, 2006, to the president that followed the coup d'etat of 2004. They couldn't do it in that period, but they held the election on, or just maybe it was on February 7th, 2006. I forget if it was a couple of days before, but the election happened on February 7th, 2006. That was sort of the compromise they made. And then the winner of that election took power in May.
Okay. Yeah. So now, if you're up for it, we're going to do a little bit of film analysis.
Okay.
To have a kind of a
Diversity?
Yeah, perhaps, I guess, to have a, well, one, because last week, I forget if it was last week or if it was in the issue review, we had this week an article on the FPR, which is like Revolutionary Popular Forces, something like that, uh, from Rwanda. And it's funny that it's named that, and it's funny. It makes me think of that the um, the organization. This is kind of just a sidebar, but the organization that Emmanuel Constant had similar
Yes.
kind of,
Right, which was the Revolutionary Front for Haiti something. Yeah, FRAP.
FRAP, yeah,
Yeah.
some kind
They
of,
had revolutionary in there. Yeah.
yeah. So just because something is called something, right? Like, you know, but we had that article, and I think I mentioned that, one of the movies that a lot of people will watch is Hotel Rwanda. If people are ever learning in school or whatever, I think people in high schools get shown that movie, and I vaguely remember it was talked about in a class that I took in high school. But I mean, it's rare people even learn about Africa in general. So it's kind of, if one thing is taught, it's like this narrative, which is for the Clinton world perspective on what happened in Rwanda. But it was making me think, just generally, we talk about film a lot, and you're a filmmaker. I'm not sure that people who tune in each week to the live streams may all be aware of that to some extent, because we do talk about, uh, we mention, or it's on the YouTube channel, Another Vision, of course, but there's a film,
And it's on the website too,
and
on
on the
the
website.
homepage. Yeah.
But again, I mean, if people are just, coming for live streams and kind of seeing these pop up on the front page of the channel.
By the way, are we
Live.
sure our live stream is running
Yeah,
there? You
yeah,
can
it
see
says
it. Okay,
live
good.
in the
Okay, good.
red box in the
Okay,
corner.
thank you.
Um,
My eyes are not
so
his.
I wanted to bring up a film. I have it hidden behind me.
Oh, look at this. Boy, this really is.
do
Oh, okay.
this
Entertaining.
Kind of visual. I can show it to the camera. People can see it a little bit.
Got a little sticker on the back and everything there.
Yeah, this is so I will give this over to the
Okay, thank you
filmmaker.
very much.
And the first question that I have, and maybe this will just be kind of the main kind of forum for analyzing the film or thinking about it, is the filmmaking process for this film. And we've touched on it a little bit, because the kind of economic analysis that comes from going to Haiti at that particular time has come up a little bit. Just looking at going to factories when they still were, or when we're first starting to be developed. Now we have these free trade zone factories on the border, and there's differences in the political economy, and that's part of what the film talks about. So, this is not a specific question, but just more so, again, for those who are tuning in and may not be aware of the film. I've seen the film, and we've talked a lot about the process of going and making it, but maybe if you have like a specific kind of memory of the film, and how again, kind of the process of making it, because when we're here on the show, you're not just here as kind of the English language editor for the paper, but also as a filmmaker, kind of having this other side of media that we're doing too, with live streaming being another aspect of pushing the revolutionary perspective, and the kind of united being on all these different fronts of making revolutionary propaganda.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, it's really funny that you should ask me this kind of spontaneous question, because I didn't even know it was coming, because it's ironically extremely apropos at this very moment. I can give an answer which is quite timely to this. Just to jump to the punchline, Bitter Cane which has been recently remastered from the original 16 millimeter.
If it will pick up from where we left off. Okay. It seems like we're picking up from where we left off because our time is still 1
Okay,
hour and
but you need to tilt it down a bit.
Oh yeah.
A little more, 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 a little more. Okay, that's good. Yeah.
Okay. I say we just keep going because now
Okay, but now are we are connected. It does say that we're
live. We have a comment section
okay.
of people.
Okay, so we had a little hiccup there. Hopefully we're continuing, but we should still be live. Okay, so the question was your question. Did it go out?
I'm not really sure because I think I asked the question and then it had the thing, oh, warning, your Wi-Fi, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we'll just repose it.
Okay,
anyways,
repose the question.
yeah,
So it was about
I'll
Bitter
be
Cane,
a
which he
little bit
pulled out of his hat.
faster.
Yeah.
But yes, we have a film. I'm gonna actually, because I'm already kind of, I'll just show it closer to the camera. Yeah, so people can see the film.
Okay. Bitter Cane.
Yeah.
Produced in 1983.
And the film is up on our channel as well, so people can watch.
Is it?
It is, yeah.
The Vimeo version.
I think so, yeah.
But don't watch that one.
Okay.
It's very poor quality, which
Yeah,
is where
that's
I
right.
was getting
Yeah,
to.
a lot of the
It's very poor quality, and it has just been remastered. As I was in the process of saying, I think most of it was off camera. I was jumping to the beginning of the response to Joseph's question about the making of Bitter Cane. The film was redone last year by an outfit called Indie Collect, which takes the old 16 millimeter films and using the modern technology of 2025, rescans from the negative, because it used to be you had a negative and from that you would make prints. So the negative is used in the original mag track, which is where you put all the sound, the mixed sound. So they go back and they redo the film, and it really almost looks better than the original 16 millimeter version. We had a showing at BAM, the Brooklyn Academy of Music, last year. It was scheduled for 1 week. I think we went for 3 weeks in the end because of demand, which was similar to what happened to Bitter Cane in 1983. We had a 1 week show, were scheduled for 1 week at the Public Theater, and it ended up being extended for 3 months because of the demand of people who turned out. And in recently, it was just selected to be part of the 1001 best documentaries from 1895 to 2010 by UNESCO, which is quite an honor. So we are part of the 1001 best documentaries from them. So just to finish the sort of punchline, on December 8th in Los Angeles, as part of the what's called Rescue Fest 2025. It's the second year, which is a film festival produced by Indie Collect, the people who redid Bitter Cane, and they will be showing it as their sort of on their closing night at a theater in Santa Monica. In any case, people can go find the Rescue Fest, one word, 2025 website and find. I will be flying to Los Angeles to talk after the film, as I did after showings at BAM, as I did after showings in Burlington, and we've had it at the Third Horizon Festival in Miami in June. So the film's been doing a theatrical re-release, because that's how films used to be done. They would first release in theaters, in projections, in large groups, and then after it finishes its theatrical run, it goes to video. So we are now shopping around for a platform. We hope it's Criterion. We hope, if Criterion you're watching, please call us. We're hoping to be part of the Criterion collection, which is kind of deluxe, very popularly acclaimed films, and we think Better Kane includes as part of that. So again, mark it on your calendar, those of you in Los Angeles, for December 8th. Okay, so Better Kane. You ask about the filmmaking process. Well, it's funny you should ask about the filmmaking process, because back in the 1980s, filmmaking was a real challenge, particularly in a country like Haiti, where you had a paramilitary force, anti-communist, that was trying to control any dissent, and to go around with a big 16 millimeter camera on your shoulder and another guy with what was an electronic slate and a big Nagra, which was a sort of recording machine about this big, which had reel-to-reel tapes on it. I mean, you stuck out like a sore thumb. And especially if you had two white guys, which we were, it was a real challenge to do it. Anyway, I won't go into all the details of how we managed to film under the Duvalier dictatorship in 1981 and 1982. But I will say that we just had a talk in Washington at the Dorothy Day House on Rock Creek Church Road, headed by Kathy Boylan. And we had a full house. A lot of people were there. But what was most interesting was I met a young filmmaker, a young student, 22 years old, your age, Joseph, who is very passionate about documentary film. And she wanted to engage. We didn't show any documentary film. We talked about it, but she was so inspired that she came. She spoke to me, and we actually met yesterday morning to discuss how she can start to get involved in our process. But what you have to understand is today it is very easy, comparatively, to make a film, because with your iPhone or with very inexpensive cameras and with your own laptop and a very inexpensive editing program, you can make a film, and a very, very impressive film. This was not the case in 1983. In 1983, you needed to hire a mini brigade, a mini army. So it cost tens, hundreds today of thousands of dollars, but back then it was tens of thousands. I think Better Kane, probably we produced it with a budget of about 100,000 maybe total. But you needed a lot of different specialists to do it. Cameramen who could work these very finicky, difficult to operate cameras, soundmen to operate the difficult Nagra machine, editors who knew how to work on a flatbed and deal with a Steinbeck or a Moviola Steinbed, and organize the little strips of film that you would piece together to make the film. Sound engineers, because back then you didn't have, all the sort of artificial and available on the internet. There was no internet then. Sounds that you can put to increase and make better the film. You had a million different, the mixer, the guy who mixes the film. You still need a number of specialists, as we used for Another Vision, but well, basically what I would say to progressive anti-imperialists, to especially young people here in the United States who are watching this, who may want to contribute to national liberation struggles like that in Haiti, do like this young woman did in Washington yesterday, who she has some training. She went to college and learned how to function with Final Cut and Premiere, and knows how to run a camera, has done some interning and some work at various film production houses. But it is an extremely powerful, that's why we made Another Vision, was precisely because we realized, although we write each week Haiti Liberté, which you're watching this probably on the Haiti Liberté channel, is important, but people don't read as much. They watch more, especially with the ubiquity of phones and laptops everywhere. Watching audiovisual presentation, which is a picture is worth 1,000 words, is much more effective way. Okay, so in 1983, the challenge was pretty much the same as it is today. In fact, it might be even harder today, Joseph, because of the fact that you can film almost endlessly with a camera today, whether it's your iPhone or whether it's, you know, some little Canon or, you know, Nikon film camera, video camera. You can get so much information. With film, you were somewhat limited. You really had to think about each shot. And if you watch Better Kane, we shot that at a ratio which was almost unheard of about 2-to-1. That is, we shot just about double the length of the film. The film is 75 minutes long. We probably shot maybe 2 hours of film, or 2.5, 3 hours of film. So the ratio was very small. Back in those days, it was said your ratio should be something like, I think it was 14 or 20-to-1. So we had to really think about every shot, because you had 16 millimeter magazine held 400 feet of film, which is 12 minutes. So basically you had 12 minutes and you had to really think about how you were going to use that 12 minutes. At the end, you know, we'd be conferring, you know, with I'd talk to the cameraman, how many feet do we have left? And he'd look at the gauge and he'd say, oh, we have 10 feet or we have 5 feet. Okay, so that's about 15 seconds. Let's film, I don't know, this river over here or something. You know, so this is not something you have to think about today. But as a result, you have vast amounts, so you really have to think how you're going to convey the ideas that you want to convey. So my mission that I was given back in 1977, 78 by Ben Dupuis was make a documentary film about the political economy of Haiti. So you have to think about what your end goal is. When wrestling with this, I thought, okay, are we going to have a central character, a woman we follow through the whole of Haiti and see the different parts of the political economy, etc. It didn't really seem feasible. Anyway, just to make a long story short, we decided, and this is the challenge that you today, young filmmakers, working maybe in conjunction with us or on your own or with other groups, you have to think how you are going to do it. Now, in some ways, an editor once told me, films make themselves, depends on what you get. But our goal was essentially to show production through commodities or through the output of the economy. The political economy produces something. So we said, okay, we want to show its feudal nature, we want to show its capitalist nature, and we want to show the imperialist nature. So with those three things, we said, okay, we're going to pick three items: coffee, which shows feudal production; sugar, which shows capitalist agricultural production; and then assembly industries or factory production, which showed collective but now industrial or semi-industrial production. So with those three themes, those were the three pillars around which the film is built. And then, we build off of that, showing the effects. And so really construct your films. I mean, this might be going more into the weeds than you anticipated, but construct your films in such a way that you can be as clear and elegant and straightforward and easy to grasp, as well as be interesting. Because the minute you're not clear or people don't really know what your message is, you're going to lose your audience. So try to be very clear and try to build a good structure around which to do the film. It can be done through an individual. There are films that do that. At the time when Bitter Cane came out, there was another film which was very good called El Norte, which sort of followed a migrant from Mexico coming to the US and all the travails that he had. So he kind of showed him on the farm, and the farm went under, and then he had to flee to the US, and the difficulty of the travel and the people that would die and what happened when he got to the US. So that one used more of an individual, one of the ways we thought about doing Bitter Cane. But, build the structure in an interesting way. That's what I could say.
Excellent advice for budding young filmmakers.
Yes.
And I think we come back to the films maybe in future weeks. We will, have this as a recurring kind of, have a piece of media that we are also kind of looking at on the stream. Some, live streams are almost solely dedicated to people reacting to other content. I don't know if you've ever kind of come across this, very popular online for people to watch people reacting to things, which we most of the time are talking about the paper that, is worked on throughout the week. So these stories are things that we're kind of following consistently, but it's nice to occasionally have kind of a throwback to something that is still very much related. And we could talk about other, there's plenty of other films that we have had some discussion around, and even in some cases negative, like we were kind of just touching on Hotel Rwanda and how it's really more on the other side in terms of propaganda, in terms of its, which force is it trying to kind of push, which perspective is it working on behalf of. And there's others you and I have talked about Ghost of Cité Soleil and that film. Yeah. And so media can really be technology, media can be a weapon in whichever side.
No, I think the imperialists, the ruling class here, understands in this country there's really two things we produce: weapons, bombs, missiles, which is why we've constantly been at war since the Second World War for the past 80 years. And I could call them ideological products, which are basically Disney, which was the first one, which creates these images. And anybody who's ever been to Disney World or Disneyland will see, they create these idealized sort of, they're real, but it's kind of unreal. Something's wrong because it's not the way it really is in the real world. But every blade of grass, every house, every character, every message is sort of clean, sanitized, presented in a way to lead you. And they've done this in every realm. I mean, in my generation, and there are myriad, you had the, let's say, the James Bond films, which, create a whole world outlook. And, the films are a huge ideological struggle. The CIA works very carefully with them to, present down to the very lines, that James Bond will say. You could take a lot of the sitcoms that you see on television, which also do this. So revolutionary media, resistance media, media which is pushing back on these tremendous ideological formation and maintenance products. It's hard. It's hard to compete with them. And occasionally, when there is a breakout one that does happen, they'll co-opt it. They'll make ones just like it. A little bit, one thinks of the anti-war movement that began after the Vietnam, or during the Vietnam War, when a lot of American petty bourgeois and working class kids were being shipped off to go be shot up in some rice paddy over in Vietnam. And there developed a peace movement. And there was a lot of sort of resistance, nonviolent, holding hands, kind of inspired by the civil rights struggle. People growing their hair long and hippies and etc. But the capitalists found a way to co-opt that, and they, would make songs to sell Pepsi Cola. Join the Pepsi generation, or Coke. It's the real thing. So these are just very, anecdotal or single examples of how they will take that cultural shift, which is a genuine resistance or rebellion, and co-opt it. And now we're going to sell you products. So if you drink a Pepsi, you'll be kind of freer. You'll be part of a generation of Pepsi drinkers and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, that might be a little incoherent, or maybe it's not even apropos to the audience that's watching. It might be too dated, but I think people get the idea of producing films, realize what you're going up against, realize what you're responding to, make it simple, make it clear. And any feedback on the films we have, Better Kane or Another Vision series, or Intervention versus Revolution, which are the main ones on our channel. We welcome any comments. And again, shout out to Dan Cohen, our colleague at Uncaptured Media. And one last thing I'd like to say, just while we're on this theme, Joseph, is he's done a lot on the weaponization of social media, because his feeling is very strong, and I'll probably not present it as expansively or as clearly as he would, but that really this is a total corporate controlled, military industrial complex controlled medium, which is used, as Noam Chomsky once said, one of the ways you keep the population docile and in certain parameters is you establish the parameters of the debate and make a great deal of heat and controversy happen within those parameters. And even the one who's the more iconoclastic or radical, apparently, in that parameters of debate, you even promote them. So you get the idea of sort of a controlled opposition. So one of the things he uses is the case of COVID and the so-called debate between lab leak versus was the viruses or the apparent viruses origin a bat bite, somewhere in China, or eating a bat somewhere in China. for him, this is, as he points out, this is a false debate, because it wasn't a question of a lab leak. Not to say there isn't a Wuhan lab, or there wasn't, but that in fact what happened was something even more nefarious. What he feels is a seeding of this RNA virus, and he does this on the basis of talking to biologist Jay Cooey, who has looked with extremely educated eyes at this whole matter and come to that conclusion. Anyway, all of this to say that there becomes a controlled opposition, and social media really lends itself to this. And their feeling, that of Dan Cohen and Jay Cooey, for example, are that social media is in many ways a very dangerous, almost debilitating force in our society right now. Not that you're not watching this on social media, you can find good things, but it needs to be used and interacted with very judiciously, because the algorithms are just the tip of the iceberg. They are using this to feed you a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and control you in a lot of ways. So anyway, we got sort of off on social media after going on.
Always come back.
Yeah.
To
we can maybe interview Dan in one of these things at one of these days, because he is gave a very passionate discussion about this after our meeting in Washington this past weekend.
Excellent. Well, that's all. We had our hour and a half. I think that's pretty good.
Okay, good
for today. But appreciation to those who were in the chat as well. A couple comments to check out after the fact, and tune in next week. We'll hopefully continue with the themes. We'll have the issue review on Wednesday as well. Wednesday around the evening, afternoon time, which is when the paper is coming out, and it's available online as well as in print. So again, thanks for tuning in, and see you next week.
See you next week.
Someone says